Good evening. It's nice to be here. I've been asked to review, are there simpler forms of getting the benefits of exercise? So exercise doesn't have to be very complicated. It doesn't have to be very expensive. When we were young, we used to read Guyton's textbook of physiology, Gray's Anatomy. Recently, I checked out what the medical students are studying. They said even the professors, some of them, they don't know what these books are. They read and study what is called a guidebook. So which gives the essence of the subject, and they could finish it in 6 weeks or 2 months. When I've been asked to speak of exercise mimetics, it seems to me that I have to write a summary of the guidebook, a smaller version of the guidebook to make it even simpler. As I said, you don't have to really be very well trained. You don't need a lot of equipment. And you don't have to really learn also what to do exercise. Of course, if you can do all of these, that's a different thing. And this walker is not an ordinary walker, he's a specialist. We only look at his walking, not at the way in which he walks. And it's a saying that if exercise could be packaged into a pill, it would be the single most widely prescribed and beneficial medicine in the world. There have been some lazier people earlier than me who had this idea. Why should you really waste your sweat? Can't you have a simpler way of having the advantage of exercise? Just pop a pill and be done with it. So what I'm trying to do is to see if the wish is only part of the horse, or is there any truth in this? And if there is truth, how far are we from this? Exercise has been called a countermeasure to human aging. So besides a number of other abnormalities, aging could be halted, if not really reversed, by means of physical exercise. And so the use of exercise mimetics or exercise pills is not far off from the theme of aging in today's evening's seminar. There are few laws of physiology. That is, we learn of laws, but most of them are not really laws in the sense of Newton's laws or anything like that. But still we have soft laws, we could say, of physiology, one of which says that exercise is beneficial. It has positive effects on health. It's not a straightforward method. It's a result of complex interactions, but still there is unequivocal evidence that exercise is beneficial for health. On the other hand, on the contrary, it also says that aging is ubiquitous. No matter what you do, we tend to age. And this again is not straightforward. It's not a simple A is equal to B or 2 into 2 is equal to 4. It occurs in a complex manner by means of a number of intertwining changes of the body. So what we are trying to see is there a common ground? Could we look at physiology to match the beneficial exercise effects on physiology, trying to slow, if not really stop aging by means of physical exercise? That's the basic theme of this evening's presentation. It's not that physiology hasn't helped us. It has helped us in the past. We've got insights into the transmittable diseases, infectious diseases. Physiology has helped us to develop vaccines And it has also helped us to devise preventive medicines so that infections can be prevented. All these are the results of applying physiology and altered physiology, what we call as pathology. So is it possible that we could use the principles of physiology to try to prevent or postpone the non-communicable diseases? After all, communicable diseases are coming down until COVID has set up, and we are mostly focused on the non-communicable diseases. So is it possible for us to use physiology to deal with this? Physical exercise has a number of positive effects. It reduces the amount of abdominal fat. It improves the function of the heart as well as the lungs. It also has good metabolic effects. Plus, it also has effects on the brain to improve cognition. Biochemically, it increases the mitochondriogenesis. It improves the oxidative fiber type of the muscles, increases fatty acid oxidation as well as increases the aerobic activity. So these are the overview of the positive effects of exercise. And is there a way of devising an agent, if not agents, to mimic these positive effects of physical exercise? Dementia is a concomitant of aging, and there are various methods to try to reduce it. Looking at the heart, follow a healthy diet, challenge your brain. But one of the important things which can be done is be physically active. So it's possible that the cognitive decline can also be reduced by means of physical exercise, beside a number of other things. So this is the basic biochemistry of physical exercise, which tends to increase the levels of brain-derived neurotropic factor and other unknown factors. This in turn increases the neurogenesis, increases the synaptic numbers and function, improves the vascular health of the brain, and finally reduces the risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. So this is one other target we are trying to see, whether exercise mimetics could really help. And that's what we mean by the exercise pill. How easy it would be if you could just pop in a pill and have all the biochemical effects, the good biochemical effects of physical exercise without really having to do that. There's been a lot of information or rules and regulations about the amount of exercise that should be done, starting from the 1970s up to 210. And the 2020 WHO has given guidelines on physical activity and sedentary behavior. In those aged 18 to 64 years, the amount of exercise that is advised has been increased to at least 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity. At the minimum, they said do at least for 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intense aerobic physical activity. For additional benefits, on at least 2 days, we do muscle strengthening exercises, and they've given other alternatives for the exercise amount that is needed. In the older adults, those who are 65 years and older, and for these, exercise mimetic or the exercise pills could be helpful. Additional benefits come with more than 300 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity. In other words, there are rules saying this is the amount of exercise you have to do. We looked at our own database almost 15, 20 years back for my Pfizer duration. When I looked at the number of people with diabetes who were doing physical exercise, at that time, just about 20% of women were doing any kind of physical exercise. But that is excluding household work. and men only about 40 to 50% were doing physical exercise. That's a pretty disheartening feature. So this is a more recent one, at least compared to the Pfizer duration. When we looked at what are the factors which were keeping people with diabetes from exercising, they said that men were able to exercise on their own, but women or wives were dependent on the husbands for doing physical exercise. At least that's what we have reported in India. So I reviewed the 2019 International Journal of Diabetes in Developing Countries for the top 10 papers. And this is a report from Jamaica, the pattern of physical exercise, where nearly 1/3 of them said they were low active and only about 25% of them said they were highly active. They perceived exercise as being hard work. It was tiring and fatiguing. And those who were older tended to be more sedentary. If obviously we need to do more for this. So this is an interesting approach to the physical activity behavior, where they have looked at the various stages in which a person starts exercise. First, he or she thinks about contemplating whether to do physical exercise or not. Next, they prepare for this either mentally or physically by means of purchasing equipment or deciding on the time and place to exercise. And then they really exercise. And the final and important step is they have to maintain it. It's not enough you start it and then forget it. It's not like the old Honda motorcycle advertisement where they said you fill it and forget it. It's not that. You have to continue with this. And only less than 1/4 of them were in the maintenance phase. In other words, we need to do more, either in terms of how to make them exercise or look at innovative ways. So the point comes, is exercise really helpful or is it only a hearsay? From the evolutionary perspective, until 200 or 300 years, most of the humans were in the hunter-gatherer societies. Maybe they were not hunting really for food, but they were facing periods of famine until technology changed all that. Genes don't change as fast as technology or human behavior does. And so what the genetic makeup of humans is, it tries to optimize the aerobic metabolism and to conserve energy in periods of food scarcity. Once you don't have food scarcity, what was good becomes bad. There is increasing epidemiological evidence for cardiovascular risk factors. Sitting has been shown to be having adverse cardiovascular effects. And there are some studies who showed that elite athletes, they lived at least 4 to 5 years more than those who were sedentary. And these were elite and they continued to exercise. It's not that they were depending on their grandfathers or their own previous attributes, but they continued to exercise. And there is a basis for protection where exercise training, it restores and improves the endothelial function or the vascular function is improved. There is ample epidemiological evidence where there is improvement of the glucose metabolism, lipids, triglycerides are lower. Hope I haven't answered one of the quiz questions. The blood pressure can lower and there is an improvement in the autonomic dysfunction, which is one of the silent ways in which cardiac dysfunction occurs. So are we really looking at an exercise pill or are we just saying that wish there were a pill? Exercise and the skeletal muscle. What does physical exercise do to the skeletal muscle? Besides other things, most of the exercise is related to activity of the skeletal muscle. And these muscles have an adaptive response. They have increased oxidative capacity. The density of the mitochondria increases and the skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity improves. These are the essential changes or the essential positive aspects of metabolic changes in the skeletal muscle. But bear in mind that it also has effects on other tissues other than the skeletal muscle. Now, how does the muscle communicate with the other tissues? Once it is active, it secretes factors called the myokines, which are proteins which are secreted by the muscles when it is exercised. Once you speak of myokines, you may have heard of exercise factors in relation to exercise. And what is the difference between the exercise factors and the myokines? Exercise factor is produced by the skeletal muscle in response to exercise, and it is released into the circulation. In other words, it's something akin to the classical definition of a hormone. Whereas myokines again are proteins. They are secreted by the skeletal muscle and they have a role in autocrine, paracrine, or in an endocrine manner. That means they could have effects locally where they are produced in the tissues that are close to them, or they can go into the circulation and have positive effects in a much farther distance. And mind you that myokines are produced not only the muscle, but by other tissues as well. In response to exercise, what are the myokines that are secreted? Interleukin 6 is the most well studied, and this is secreted in response to physical exercise. The others are CCL2 and CX3 and CL1. In response to both acute exercise as well as exercise training, the spark is secreted, but this evidence is mainly in the microarray studies, and it is secreted in response to both the acute as well as the exercise training response. In exercise training, myostatin is a protein which has a role in the hypertrophy of muscle fibers, and it also determines the type of muscle fiber that is produced by means of exercise training. So this seems to be specific for exercise training and not just acute physical exercise. The others are irisin, IL, interleukin 8, interleukin 15. All these are work in progress. We don't really have definite data to say that they have a role as communicators for either acute exercise or chronic exercise. In addition to this, there are autocrine factors and paracrine factors. They don't go into the circulation, namely the FGF21, the BDNF in the brain, as well as apelin. These have more local effects. These again are not well established, and these are being studied about their effect after physical exercise. So this is a table of the different myokines, whether it's an exercise factor or not. The ANGPTL4 is one which is definitely an exercise factor. It has an activity following acute exercise. Apelin, perhaps exercise training, yes, it does have an effect. BDNF, perhaps it's an exercise factor and it has both acute and training effects that are seen. And there's a whole list of other factors. So what are the putative effects? As I said, the interleukin 6, acutely it improves insulin signaling. It increases insulin sensitivity in the skeletal muscle. Chronically, it reduces the insulin sensitivity in liver and adipose tissue. So it has opposing effects in the acute effect and the chronic effect. So that's a whole list of these. This is a review from Physiology 2020. The earlier one was about 7 or 8 years old. What you could immediately perceive is the number of myokines, the number of exercise factors are increasing by the week, if not by the day. And if you want to really look at it, it will take you a semester of study to really look at these different factors. And what I mean to convey from this is a number of factors are secreted. These are being identified by newer techniques, and they're trying to understand what each of them do or how they interact with others and what they do to the physiology finally. So in summary, myokines, a number of them were identified, but we have limited information about what they do. And for most of what we know, probably they have local actions and their systemic effects are not as much as compared to their local actions. The only well-established myokine is IL-6. There are certain promising exercise factors, but if you want to know of the factor which has been well studied and which is related to both acute and chronic exercise or exercise training, it is interleukin 6. But the function is not very clear. So this shows the way in which physical exercise acts at the level of the stem cell to act on the fat cells, on the bones, on the endothelial cells, on the brain, as well as the skeletal muscles to change the ways in which the stem cells are activated. And the positive effects of physical exercise are manifest as a result of action on these different organs. So this gives the details of how it does. AMPK is one signal which could make a difference. It could also act at the level of the reactive oxygen species. And this is a 20-page review. I'm just giving you a flavor of the complexity of exercise and its effects on the physiological systems. So if you could summarize the effects of exercise, the stimulus, it could be either changes in the pH, metabolites, the ATP-ADP ratio. This acts through the kinases and the phosphatases, which in turn act via the transcription factors and the coactivators, finally manifesting in the skeletal muscle adaptations like biogenesis at the level of the mitochondria, the antioxidant effects, the hypertrophy of the muscles, and cytoprotection. So these are the 4 levels at which physical exercise manifests its positive effects. Now we come to exercise mimetics. In other words, if you can't win over your enemy, join them. If you can't do physical exercise, try to find out what the physical exercise does and try to take them. So that's a working definition which says that an exercise mimetic is a pharmacological compound or compounds that are able to produce the benefits of fitness. So they're able to mimic the good effects of exercise by means of being taken orally or by any other means. These are produced in the laboratory or outside. So these positive effects are increased mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation and effects on the fatty acid metabolism. So that's what exercise does, and that's what these exercise mimetics they try to do. There are prototype exercise mimetics. The 2 of them are well known and they are famous for a slightly bad reason. One is called the GW501516 and the other is called the AICAR. They have the good effects of lowering blood glucose levels, reducing inflammation and insulin resistance, and they can also increase the endurance. Coming to the various groups of exercise mimetics, what are the various classes. The first and most well studied is the AMPK activators. The AMPK is a metabolic sensor that directly responds to exercise-induced energetic stress. So the effects, the biochemical effects or the metabolic response to exercise is mediated by the AMPK. And they try to see if this could be activated without doing exercise. AICAR and CPD14 are synthetic small molecules which can activate the AMPK. R419 is another compound, and they said that it activates AMPK more potently than metformin. So the reading between the lines, we could think of metformin as an exercise mimetic, although it is weaker than the other synthetic compounds. Then we have the PPR delta ligands, GW501516. It's a synthetic ligand. It's not useful on its own, but when you give it with AICAR, it boosts the mitochondrial biogenesis, oxidative metabolism, and the genes which are linked to these. But then the problem is these were used by elite athletes because if they could shave off even a fraction of a second, that makes a difference between silver and gold. And so they were misusing it, and it has been listed in the banned agent. Don't be afraid. They are trying to develop safer agents, and so we'll have to be careful, like you have the viruses in the software. And then another group of activators is the SIRT1 activators. Resveratrol has exercise-mimicking effects in the skeletal muscle. It activates the skeletal muscle SIRT1 to increase the PGC1A, along with activation of the ERRA, ERRD, and PPARD. Together, these induce the genes that control mitochondrial biogenesis, fatty acid transport, and the oxidative metabolism. In other words, acting together, these mimic the positive effects of physical exercise. It has a weak effect, but still it has got some effect. And then the last, or one of the last groups are the REV-ERBA ligands, SR9009 and SR9011. These are synthetic ligands. They have nuclear receptor effects. They influence the circadian rhythm as well as the energy metabolism. And they have specific selective action on the skeletal muscles. They directly regulate mitochondrial oxidative genes, and circadian alteration of the sensitivity of muscle to the different stimuli is also seen. And it's possible that these yet to be used ligands can make a difference in the circadian regulation of the genes. The bottom line is exercise mimetics have been tested mainly in the animal models. These are only proof of concept. Whatever have been used now have severe side effects. Along with the effects, they also have side effects. If you inhibit the mitochondrial ATP production, you run the risk of lactic acidosis. Remember the anti-diabetic agent, which was very effective, more effective than metformin, fenformin, but it was associated with lactic acidosis. And these AMPK activators have cardiac as well as GI disturbances. But since we have the concept molecules, it's possible that newer agents will be developed and they could be used as exercise mimetics. Where there is use, there is scope, especially as I said, the endurance athletes were using these two agents, and these two agents have a long half-life in the body, and they can be identified. The World Anti-Doping Agents has listed these two as banned agents. Mind you, exercise and the myokines are not the only one-to-one relationship. There's a lot of complexity that is involved. There's been a publication in Cell Metabolism where they identified the integrated AMPK substrate prediction in the human muscle and cells. They made the person to rest, and at the end of exercise, they have looked at the exercise regulated AMPK substrates. And what they found was, look at the last one is, they showed 1,000, more than 1,000 unique exercise regulated phosphosites on 562 proteins. So it's not one or two or three. It's more than 1,000 proteins, and these are related to more than 500 proteins that are found. So this is a cartoon of what they've done. They've done the acute exercise. They validated the AMPK substrate. Then they experimentally validate the AMPK substrate function. And then they did the SELA-C labeling, phosphopeptide enrichment, and then they came back circularly, and they found that there is so much of complexity that is involved in this. So the bottom line is they expose the unexplored complexity of acute exercise signaling, and also hint that AMPK has a role in mitochondrial biochemistry. So before you think of having an easy way of sitting on your desk and popping in a pill, these are the complexities that are involved. So therefore, what are the targets for pills? Exercise, as I said, the AMPK, PGC1 alpha, as well as the PPAR gamma. Multiple tissues, the SR9001 at the level of the REV, ERB, AICR and metformin at the AMPK. This in turn acts on PGC and the PPAR delta. The other two agents act at possibly PPAR delta as well as the ER. So this is another way of looking at this. Look at the various drugs. They have to act at the fatty acid oxidation, mitochondrial biogenesis, as well as the angiogenesis, endurance activity, as well as anti-obesity actions. Resveratrol is one, GSK 4716 is another. So where are we? Is the exercise pill the only answer? No. You could look at it in three stages. One, you can have a policy stages where public transport, the built environment can be altered to improve the access to physical exercise. And you try to increase the physical activity by means of campaigns like sitting is the new smoking, or having or count the steps you do, or tell them that exercise, even a little bit of exercise helps. And finally, you have what is called the polypill, or the third stage in which exercise mimetics could have the beneficial effects of exercise without really exercising. Unfortunately, human psychology being as it is, pills and surgery have a long queue, whereas lifestyle change is good, but there are few takers for this. You try to look at technology, you do the massaging, try to stop eating by means of bariatric procedures, cut your abdomen and do this, do physical exercise, or you try to have some of these things where you try to vibrate and lose weight. But ultimately, physical exercise is what is present with us. And for those of you who want to look at a detailed recent review of the physiology of exercise mimetics, look at Journal of Physiology, 2020. It was published online in July, pages 1 to 12, part 1. They haven't really given a volume to this, but if you want to look at this, this is the one to do. So I've come to the end of the presentation. Thanks for your time.